Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Savvy Ally, a guide for becoming a skilled LGBTQ advocate, by Jeannie Gainsburg. Narrated by Shaina Summerville. Publisher's note: this audiobook includes bonus material. Please visit Tantor.com and type The Savvy Ally into the search box. Follow the link to the book's page. Then, under the supplemental content section, please enter the access code PRIDE, and then click the unlock button to access the bonus material. The code should be entered in all lowercase letters. All figures and tables referenced in this audiobook can be found in the bonus material. Savvy. Adjective. Experienced, knowledgeable, and well-informed. Prologue. They always say time changes things, but you actually have to change them yourself. Andy Warhol. For my 40th birthday, my husband gave me a book that changed my life. Up until that point, I believed in LGBTQ+ equity and inclusion, but I hadn't done a thing to help create a more inclusive world. In February 2003, inspired by that book, I launched myself into a career as an ally to the LGBTQ+ communities. Here's a brief summary of my life before, during, and after I read that book, and why I became motivated to write this one. I grew up in New Jersey without any out LGBTQ+ friends or family members. I would later discover that I'd had plenty of LGBTQ+ friends. I just didn't know it. Despite this dearth of out and authentic LGBTQ+ people in my early life, the word gay wasn't avoided or considered naughty in my childhood home. When I was 10, my mother leaned across the table at Serendipity, a restaurant in Manhattan, and said to me, "Did you know that all of the waiters here are gay?" My conclusion? Gay men are nice, clean, polite people who bring you fantastic food. These were clearly superior human beings. At age 14, I was an avid fan of the TV sitcom Soap. Billy Crystal stole the show as Jody, a bright, funny gay man who was one of the first ever out and proud LGBTQ+ characters on television. A few years ago, I discovered evidence that my early environment had made me a tolerant child. While cleaning out my childhood desk, I found a note that I had passed in 8th grade science class, circa 1977, with my best friend. In it, we were discussing gay people. My friend argued that gay people were gross. I countered with this thorough and articulate rebuttal. "What is your problem? Live and let live." Finding evidence that as a young teen in the 1970s I'd had a very chill attitude about gay people made me incredibly happy. But I certainly was no ally at that point. As a teenager, I couldn't understand why folks got their knickers in a knot over whom people loved, but I hadn't done anything to promote inclusion, understanding, and acceptance. I didn't know the word ally, and I didn't know that, as someone who had no connection to the LGBTQ+ communities, there could be a role for me in supporting them. My budding passion and ally efforts would lie dormant for another quarter of a century. All sorts of events related to the LGBTQ+ communities were brewing as I approached my 40th birthday. Marriage equality was newly being discussed in the media. James Dale lost his lawsuit against the Boy Scouts of America, allowing the organization to legally continue to discriminate against gay scout leaders. My young children had started school, and I was disheartened to find that gay slurs were still extremely prevalent among elementary school children. Then, one night, I was in bed reading the book my husband had given me for my 40th birthday. Not for Ourselves Alone. It's the companion book to the Ken Burns documentary on the battle to secure the right to vote for women in the United States. I was awed, thankful, and inspired by the amazing women who had gone before me and fought for my right to vote. I was doing something that I often find myself doing when I read history. I was imagining myself back in that time period and wondering how I would have behaved if I had lived then. And I had convinced myself that I would have fought alongside Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. Suddenly, it hit me. What a hypocrite I was being! Here I was, fantasizing about how I would have behaved more than 100 years ago, while social justice battles were happening right now, in my own lifetime, and I was sitting them out. I thought to myself, what will I tell my grandchildren if they ever ask me if I was involved in the fight for LGBTQ+ rights? When I reflect back on my life, will I know that I have left the world a better place? How have I gotten so caught up in my daily life that I have lost track of the big picture? The next morning, I looked up the word gay in the phone book. Yes, I really did. Found our local LGBTQ+ center and called to ask if I could volunteer. I began my volunteer work by answering phones at the office and training to be a public speaker. I knew almost nothing about the LGBTQ+ communities, and I messed up frequently with my language and assumptions. The center's staff and volunteers were very welcoming, patient, and forgiving of my blunders, but I wished I had a guidebook to tell me what to say and what not to say, with concrete tips about what I could actually do to make the world a more inclusive place. That book didn't exist. I volunteered at the center for 3 years. During that time, I learned the word ally within the framework of social justice work. I now had an identity within the LGBTQ+ movement, which also meant that there was a place and a role for me. I was told repeatedly that my voice as an ally was incredibly important. My new volunteer work was truly life-changing. It launched me into a career as an active ally. In 2006, I was hired as the center's education and outreach coordinator. In 2013, I was promoted to education director, a role I held for more than 5 years. Since that first phone call, I have met the most amazing people, learned so much about the LGBTQ+ communities and myself, and come to understand the many gifts I can give back to a group of people who have welcomed me with open arms. This book, The Savvy Ally, is the book I wanted and needed when I first began my work as an ally. It is with so much appreciation and gratitude to the many people who encouraged, educated, and supported me that I am now able to offer it as a guide for others on their journey. 1. Getting started. How wonderful it is that nobody need wait a single moment before starting to improve the world. Anne Frank. Thank you. I begin my book with a heartfelt thank you. The world needs more allies. Whether you are already fired up about being an ally to the LGBTQ+ communities and are currently out there doing ally stuff, or you are just a little ally curious, thank you for picking up this book and for your interest in creating a more equitable, safe, and inclusive world. What you can expect from this book. This book is focused on how to be an ally to the LGBTQ+ communities, not why to be an ally. There are many great books, movies, videos, and blogs out there that focus on the realities of living in our world as an LGBTQ+ person, the history of LGBTQ+ discrimination, and why allies are so important. They have been created with the purpose of motivating non-LGBTQ+ individuals to get involved. This book is not one of them. If you picked up this book, it's my hope that you are already on board with the idea that the world needs to be more LGBTQ+ inclusive, and you want to know how you can help. This book is a collection of the tools and skills that I have discovered over the past 15 years to be the most useful in being an ally to the LGBTQ+ communities. It includes pointers for having respectful and effective conversations, the most common places that allies get tripped up or stuck, and best practice solutions for creating spaces that are LGBTQ+ inclusive. The book is divided into 4 main sections dealing with the following topics. 1. Becoming knowledgeable allies. 2. Building skills for having respectful conversations. 3. Taking action to create more LGBTQ+ inclusive spaces. And 4. Allying responsibly. My goal in writing this book is to create allies who are more active, who are kind to themselves, and who find ways to make allyship a sustainable part of their everyday life, not a frenzied burst of action followed by exhaustion or disillusionment. This book helps you navigate an often consuming and intimidating world of identities and terms, and offers suggestions for creating positive change with your words and actions. It's not as daunting as it may seem. You've got this. Defining ally broadly. An ally is a person who is not a part of a particular marginalized group, but who stands up for and advocates for the rights of people in that group. Typically, when we see the word ally in the context of LGBTQ+ advocacy, we think only of the person who is straight, i.e. heterosexual, and not transgender. However, we all can be LGBTQ+ allies, even if we are a part of the LGBTQ+ communities. If you are a lesbian, you can be an ally to the bisexual/pansexual communities. If you are a white transgender woman, you can support and advocate for transgender women of color. One of my favorite post-training evaluation comments that I often receive from LGBTQ+ participants is, "Wow, I learned so much about the LGBTQ+ communities. I didn't know how much I didn't know." You may be an expert on your own identity and community, and yet know very little about others under the LGBTQ+ umbrella, or how to be an ally to other communities. This book is for all of us. Bringing my friends along for the ride. Throughout my ally journey, LGBTQ+ community members and other allies generously shared their stories and experiences with me to help me understand concepts. With their permission, I have included quotes, stories, and experiences from my friends and colleagues to help bring concepts to light with voices from the LGBTQ+ and allied communities. When they desired it, I have honored these people by using their real names. I have used aliases for those who preferred anonymity. Thank you to all who have shared your personal experiences. You have made this book explode with personality, warmth, and humanity. It feels so right and so good to bring you all along with me for the ride. Practice makes pretty darn good. This book is not about how to be a perfect ally. It's about how to be a pretty darn good one. In an interview with Volleyball USA magazine, 3-time Olympic gold medalist Karch Karai advises, "Focus on just being good, play after play. Trying to be perfect often leads to poorer and less consistent performance. Telling ourselves that we must perform perfectly sets us up to fail. It puts so much pressure on us that instead of elevating our game, it typically has the opposite effect." My colleague Noah, a straight white transgender man, has gotten closer to becoming a perfect ally than anyone else I know. He is dedicated to social justice. He reads voraciously on the topic. He understands the nuances of advocacy work, and he is incredibly thoughtful and intentional in his language. He is my go-to guy whenever I need someone to discuss a social justice issue or concern. Here are his thoughts on perfect allies. I am far more interested in the intentional allies, folks who work hard toward the goal of advocating frequently, but not every second of every day, than the perfect allies, folks who respond to every comment, every time. I think living and acting intentionally is a far more manageable and sustainable experience. Sustained 50% is better than a burst of 100%, followed by burnout. This book is about creating and maintaining pretty darn good allies by embracing our vulnerability, forgiving ourselves when we mess up, and working to be better. The power of the ally. Social justice movements need allies. Our numbers alone can help shift cultural norms and public perceptions of marginalized groups. But allies offer more than just bodies. Here are some of the valuable gifts that our allies bring to social justice movements. Allies can help validate a cause. You may be listening to this book because you have an LGBTQ+ child, parent, or friend, and that's wonderful. I applaud you for seeking more ways to support them. The best-known ally organization in the nation is PFLAG, which was started by a gay man's mom. I don't have an LGBTQ+ child, and at the time that I began my work as a volunteer, I didn't have any local LGBTQ+ friends or acquaintances either. Because of this, many people asked me why I was getting involved. Think for a moment about the powerful statement made by this question. The implication is that no one would be involved in a particular social justice issue if it weren't about themselves, their family members, or their friends. Initially, I was concerned that I wouldn't be welcome because I didn't have an LGBTQ+ family member. In the end, I found great value in sharing that I did not, as a way of validating the fight for LGBTQ+ equity and inclusion on its own merits. Allies can be a cultural bridge. Because allies are not a part of the marginalized group, they often have a keen understanding of the myths, stereotypes, misunderstandings, and fears that get in the way of acceptance and that hold people back from getting involved, e.g., unflattering and inaccurate media portrayals of LGBTQ+ people, no personal connections to the LGBTQ+ communities, and the fear of saying something offensive. These obstacles may be the very same things that initially held us back in our own journey as allies. But the more we learn about LGBTQ+ individuals and communities, the better we become at changing hearts and minds outside those communities. We can help to bridge the gap between these two worlds and aid in understanding and communication. Allies can be possibility models. The wonderful Laverne Cox, transgender advocate, actress, and star of the show Orange is the New Black, came up with the phrase, possibility model. In an interview with Radio Times, she said, "I hate the term role model. It's presumptuous to think that anyone should model their life after you, but I do like the term possibility model." I love this sentiment. One of the most amazing things I am able to do through my work is to be a possibility model for others. I was pleasantly surprised to find out how many ally wannabes there were in my midst. When I began talking about the work I was doing, I discovered that many of my friends and acquaintances were also fully on board with LGBTQ+ rights and inclusion, and just didn't know what needed to be done or how to get involved. One of the projects I took on for our center was facilitating our bike ride fundraiser. Through this ride, I assembled an army of allies. They were able to access communities previously unreached by LGBTQ+ advocates and talk about why they rode. Allies can get special access. Because I am not a part of the LGBTQ+ communities, part of my growth as an ally was learning to navigate conversations about my identity and understanding when it was and when it wasn't important to share it. It became apparent early on that others often assumed that I was a lesbian. Not shocking, I worked for an LGBTQ+ center and I wore comfortable shoes. Fun fact, you can't really identify a lesbian by her shoes. Well, I wasn't a lesbian and I didn't become one either. 15 years working at an LGBTQ+ center, and I didn't catch the gay. I am living proof that it's not contagious. Yes, that's a joke. Often it was easier and more comfortable to simply let people assume that I was a member of the LGBTQ+ communities. However, there were many times when my voice as an ally was critical. I learned that because of my identity as an ally, I have access to systems of power and communities of people that LGBTQ+ people often don't, due to homophobia, biphobia, transphobia, and the fact that I am perceived as less threatening when I disclose that I am not LGBTQ+. I am able to have conversations around social change with people and in places that my LGBTQ+ friends cannot. I can wallow in this pitiful situation, or I can view it as an opportunity to give something back to a community of people who have welcomed me with open arms. I choose the latter. What's your story? As I mentioned earlier, this book isn't about why you should be an ally. It's about how to be an ally. The rest of this book will be focused on actions for helping to make the world a better and more inclusive place. However, I always get the why questions as I do this work, and I suspect you do, or you will, as well. Why are you so passionate? Why this social justice issue? Why are LGBTQ+ rights so important to you? Your responses to these questions can be a powerful tool for creating change, and I encourage you to think about your answers. Here's one of mine. I once asked my grandmother how the Holocaust happened. She was an elderly Jewish woman, and I thought she would be able to explain it to me. I wanted to know the details, like why the Jewish people didn't run, hide, or rip the Star of David from their clothing. But my grandmother had grown up in Brooklyn, and she couldn't explain it to me any better than the history books could. It wasn't until I read Schindler's List that I began to understand the process of systematic oppression that had taken place, starting with the name-calling and scapegoating, moving gradually into discrimination and segregation, and on to acts of violence and, eventually, to genocide. For many people, the Holocaust must feel like ancient history. But for others, like me in my 50s, it was shockingly recent. After hiding in a friend's attic for more than 2 years, Anne Frank was killed a mere 18 years before I was born. One of my biggest fears is that I will be able to explain to my grandchildren exactly how something like this could happen. How first we allowed doctors to refuse care to LGBTQ+ people because it went against their religious beliefs. How we then removed safe access to bathrooms and other facilities for transgender people. How there were mass shootings in LGBTQ+ spaces until, finally, I had people hiding in my attic. I refuse to allow this to become my future story. It's why I do the work that I do. It's why I wrote this book. Allies are a mighty and necessary force for any social justice movement. If you are inspired to be a part of that force, or you are already, I hope this book will give you tools for your adventure. If the fire to create change is not yet burning within you, I am honored that you are giving me the opportunity to light the match. Part 1. Becoming Knowledgeable Allies. 2. The glossary is at the back. It's identity, not udentity. Respect people's right to self-define. Robin Oakes. I have added a glossary of some of the basic LGBTQ+ terms in the bonus material for you to use as a reference. Identities are incredibly important, and I will share more about why that is later in this chapter. However, I have found that focusing too heavily on a large glossary of terms has the opposite effect than one might hope. People can get so intimidated by the enormous number of terms and identities that instead of having conversations, They are completely silenced by their fear that they are accidentally going to say something wrong, outdated, or insulting. Instead, in this book, I am choosing to share tips on how to navigate respectful conversations with LGBTQ+ individuals, even if you don't know or remember any of the proper terms. So, when you have a moment, feel free to take a look at the basic glossary of LGBTQ+ terms and identities that I have provided. Read the warning first and then proceed with caution. Do become familiar with the words. Do not walk through the world with your glossary in hand, labeling people. With all of that said, there are 3 terms I would like to focus on in this chapter in order to ensure that we are all on the same page, so you can get the most out of this book. They are cisgender, LGBTQ+, and queer. Cisgender. The first term is one I already had to dance around in Chapter 1, so it's definitely time to define it. This word is an excellent one to add to your vocabulary if it's not there already. From here on, I use it throughout the book. The word is cisgender. A cisgender person is an individual whose sex assigned at birth matches their gender identity, or who they know themselves to be. In other words, if the doctor or midwife said, "It's a girl," when you arrived on the planet and as you grew, that fit for you, most likely so well you never even thought about whether it fit or not, you are cisgender. It's a word that means not transgender. For those of you who are word nerds and get excited by etymology, the prefixes cis and trans originally come from Latin. Cis means on this side of, and trans means across or on the far side. So a very simplified way of thinking about this is if the sex you were assigned at birth matches or is on the same side as your gender identity, you are cisgender. If these things do not match or are across from each other, you are trans. LGBTQ+. You have probably seen many versions of the LGBTQ+ initialism. Here is a brief history of my experience with the initialism and why I have chosen to use LGBTQ+ in this book. At the time of this book's publication, in my current location in upstate New York, the full initialism most often being used is LGBTQIAA2SPP. This stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, questioning, intersex, asexual, ally, two-spirit, pansexual, and polyamorous. If you are unfamiliar with any of these identities, please take a look at that glossary in the bonus material. The reality is that the LGBTQIAA2SPP initialism is large, somewhat intimidating, and, most importantly, ever-changing. In addition, what nonprofit LGBTQ+ center can afford the ink to print that whole thing out on its brochures? Yes, that's also a joke. The plus was created not to devalue the identities that come after the Q, but to make the initialism more user-friendly and always relevant. LGBTQ+ stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer/questioning, plus so much more. Here is the history of the progression of the commonly used initialism during my work as an ally over the past 15 years. When I first started in 2003, the initialism being used most often was GLBT. A few years later, it had changed to LGBT. I believe the thinking around this was, hey, why do men always get listed first? Let's put women first for a change. Which is cool. If I ran the world, I would change up the order of the letters every 5 years or so just to keep it fair. Congratulations to our bisexual friends. It's your turn at the front. About 5 or 6 years later, around 2013, many organizations had changed the initialism on their websites and literature to LGBTQ in an attempt to be even more inclusive. The Q can stand for questioning or queer, or both. The word questioning is often included in the initialism to help us remember and embrace the fact that for many people, identity is ever-changing. Understanding who we are and defining our attractions can be a long process and may change over time. Many social and support groups include the word questioning in the list.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?